125 years of exploration, we are DC Public Library. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for regular programming for you and your family. DC Public Library, find your story.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the Indigenous people whose lands we're on, and we're all in different places. So I'm just going to acknowledge where I am, which is St. Petersburg, Florida, and that is home to the Takabaga and Seminole tribes. So we are so privileged to be joined on this panel today by three wonderful Asian American folks that I can't wait to talk to. So first, we're going to introduce Michael Dumlao, whose pronouns are he, his, and Michael is an activist, artist, and author. He's Filipino, came to the US by way of Australia. He has a rescue dog, a Chihuahua Pomeranian mix named America, which is amazing. And he's a member of the Gay Men's Chorus in DC. He has helped corporations, including those in the Fortune 500, transform their brand and creative direction with a focus on the business of equality, which I absolutely love. His book, Wisdom of Gunkles, Living Life from a Queer Perspective, comes out this August, so be sure to pre-order that. And next, I want to introduce Kevin Trong, whose pronouns are he, his. Kevin is a photojournalist and documentary filmmaker. He's based in Portland, Oregon. He is an advocate for community service and has served 2 terms with AmeriCorps. His current project, The Asian Diaspora, a storytelling project, examines racism and bigotry as experienced by Asians and Asian Americans. He's also just reached the Kickstarter goal for making a feature-length documentary about his mother. So congratulations, Kevin. And that documentary is going to be about the woman who brought Kevin and his sisters to the US from a refugee camp for Vietnamese boat people. So I can't wait to see the full-length feature. And our last distinguished guest today is Frances Kai-Hwa Wong, whose pronouns are she, her. She is a journalist, essayist, activist, and poet. She's the child of immigrants and was born in California, and those 2 things are similar to my background. She divides her time between Michigan and the big island of Hawaii. She teaches at 3 schools, the University of Michigan, Washtenaw Community College in Ann Arbor, and the University of Hawaii Hilo. In 2019, her project, Beyond Vincent Chin, Legacies in Action and Art, received $25,000 from the Knight Arts Challenge. And more recently, her poem, Sewing Aunties, was selected by Asia Pacific writers and translators to be published in a literary journal. So welcome, everybody.
Hey, thanks for having us.
So I want to start by making sure that folks who may not necessarily realize this recognize that Asian America and Pacific Islanders are not a monolith, that we're here during a month that celebrates the diversity and contributions of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, which are actually 50 ethnic groups that make up the Asian diaspora. We used to have only 10 days in May, which was bizarrely designated as Asian Pacific American Heritage Week. So I guess we got a week and a half. But in 1992, the month of May was chosen to commemorate the immigration of the first Japanese to the United States, which happened May 7th, 1843. And May was also significant because it marks the anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, which was largely built by Chinese immigrants. And that completion date was May 10th, 1869. So one of the reasons that we're here today, because the library invited us, is to talk about ways that we can find stories, finding our own stories. So I'd like each of you to talk about what it means to be Asian American in the United States today. Let's start with Frances.
So how to find our own stories?
How are you finding your story in being an Asian American in the United States today?
I find my story through writing. A lot of times I'm one of these people that I don't even know what I think until I write it down. And so by writing, I'm figuring out my own stuff, how to make sense of where my parents came from, what my parents told me to be, what outside society told me to be, and then raising children, how to help them through this, their own identity. Well, hopefully they won't have identity issues, and help raise them through all this as well. And then hopefully do some good and create some beautiful art along the way.
Great. And I love how you and Michael have activism in your current work. Michael, tell us a little bit about what it means to you to be Asian American in the United States today.
I think now more than ever, it's all about honoring our intersectionalities and our multiple identities. I think for me, particularly as a queer person with a very expansive gender expression, who is also married to a very large Peruvian and Latinx family, I've discovered the great need to really find all those places of collaboration and coalition building amongst many communities that are all fighting against injustice and fighting for greater equality. And I think in doing so as well, it's about recovering our stories and all those narratives that aren't always told from multiple perspectives, right? And really understanding what our shared histories are as oppressed peoples, as immigrants, as people who come here harboring and embodying all these different experiences, all just striving to make a better life for ourselves and build a better country.
That's so well said. Thank you, Michael. Kevin, who, despite having the same last name as me, is not a relative. Kevin, so tell us a little bit about what it means to you to be Asian American in the United States today, especially as somebody who came in as a refugee.
Honestly, for me recently, it's been a lot of healing and realizing that I've had a lot of self-hate for being Asian American growing up. And for me, that healing has been really based on finding community in other people and seeing reflections of myself and their stories and their experiences. And it's unlearning a lot of self-hate. I was, when I was younger, I was ashamed of two things. I was ashamed of being gay and I was ashamed of being Asian American. And I felt like I was able to unlearn a lot of the self-hate I had for my queer identity in my mid-20s. But when it comes to my Asian American identity, it's actually been a recent process. And finding that community has been really helpful in that for me.
Well, that's really excellent. I'm glad that you are working through those things and that is part of that healing for you. So Francis, I'd like to turn a little bit back in time to 1982, which was a watershed year with a case that really should be covered more in depth by a lot of our US history books. And I know you've done a lot of work researching Vincent Chin's case. So can you tell us a little bit more about that and how that affects Asian America today?
Yeah. In 1982, America was in the midst of Detroit especially was in the midst of a recession because the Japanese auto industry was taking off and Japanese cars were getting into the market. And so there's recession in Detroit, and a lot of people who worked in the auto industry blamed Japan for why they were losing their jobs. And so during this time, Vincent Chin was a 27-year-old Chinese American man. He worked as a draftsman and he was going to school. I mean, he worked in the auto industry too, but he at his bachelor party a week before his wedding, he encountered these two white auto workers who they got into a fight, and the man said to him, "It's because of you MFs that we're out of work." And they fought in the bar, they got thrown out of the bar, they ran off into the night, and then these men stalked them for half an hour till they found Vincent Chin and beat his head in with a baseball bat, 4 blows. And Vincent Chin, his last words were, "It's not fair," before he slipped into a coma. A week later, all the people that are coming to his wedding came to his funeral instead. And then at the trial, this criminal trial, the judge fined these people $3,000, and they never spent, to this day, have never spent a day in jail. And the judge said, "These aren't the kind of men you send to jail. You fit the punishment to the criminal, not the crime." And this was a moment when Asian Americans realized that it doesn't matter if you say, "Oh, well, that's a Japanese problem and I'm Chinese," or "That's a Korean problem," or "I'm Filipino." It doesn't really matter because racists are not very smart. And so it behooves us to come together and work together for civil rights, and because we're much stronger together than apart. And then this is,
Well, thank you so much for that quick history lesson. There's so much to mine there, and I'm glad that you're continuing to work to educate people to understand that history is not terribly far removed from what we're experiencing now. We have seen a major uptick in anti-Asian violence and crimes. And I recall that some Pacific Islander activist groups were actually saying that they wanted to change the hashtag, which had started as stop AAPI hate, and there's that organization, but they wanted to make it a little broader as to stop Asian hate. And that's fine. I think, I want to acknowledge that people had said that they think that these attacks have been broadly not against Pacific Islanders, but if someone's out there planning to attack a community, I don't think they necessarily ask you exactly who you are. They're kind of looking at, you all look the same, and they have many times this sensibility of, we're others, and potentially are blaming Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders for bringing coronavirus and COVID to the United States when, we're still trying to figure out where that originated. And even if we figure out that it did come from Asia, that is not a reason to blame Asian Americans and, exert violence on anyone. So Michael, all of us on this panel are either immigrants ourselves or one generation removed. Tell us a little bit more about how it enriches our stories to have those spiritual and cultural ties to our various homelands. You alluded to that earlier.
Absolutely. I think one of the most enriching and beautiful aspects of our identities as Asian Pacific Islanders is that whether we are descended from immigrants or are ourselves immigrants, is that I do believe that our narratives are tied spiritually, culturally, maybe even professionally to our ancestral homelands. I would say that in my own journey of navigating my experience as a queer immigrant, I've noted that at least here in America, the story of immigration tends to be about those that leave their homelands to pursue a better life. And I think more rarely about the people we leave behind who stay and strive to build a better life back home. In fact, I would say that in the rise of the awareness of the systemic inequalities here in the United States, I myself have had to pull from my own recollections and experiences growing up under martial law in the Philippines during the Marcos dictatorship, and how I watched as a small child what happens when a people rise up to overthrow oppression and then discover that liberty is fragile, that rights are embattled, and frankly, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. And I'm really honored to be part of families and communities back home in the Philippines and also here in America who continue to fight for equality, especially back home where my country is still under very challenging and oppressive rule. So I think now, there really is this need to honor the experiences of the diaspora and to know that our struggles and triumphs and our stories of resilience are all interconnected.
That's so well said. And you had talked a little bit as we were preparing for this panel about how you live in DC and that there was, that you never thought that you would see this kind of attempted overthrow where you live now. Tell us a little bit more about how that felt.
I will say January 6th was probably one of the most triggering moments of my life because my family, I literally watched an insurgency, growing up. I saw, a massive people rise up to overthrow a government, and I saw what happened to that. And we felt that level of instability, was something we had escaped. And then fast forward to to just not that long ago, right? January 6th, 2021. And I saw the exact same thing, but for very, very different reasons. And I saw how, that it's interesting basically how you could see so many things happen. And I think for a lot of immigrants, I remember distinctly remembering how the day that we saw what was happening on the Capitol, which is literally only 10, 15 minutes away from my home, I immediately, called my parents and my mom saying, I thought we had left this behind. I can't believe this is happening. In many ways, we rose up to overthrow a dictator. It feels like January 6th, it was, an attempt to keep one in power. But in general, what I always felt was that we were trying to distance ourselves and realize that at the end of the day, those kinds of struggles and those kinds of efforts are not that far away. I will say that, my husband is Peruvian and he grew up under this shining path, terrorist movements in Peru. I have tons of friends from all around the world in DC who all grew up under these kinds of circumstances. And it was very triggering for a lot of us, to see this happening so very close to our homes and realize that, like I said, it's all about vigilance. It's all about, noting that these things will always follow us. And that even more so, we have to rely on community to understand what that means for us and what that means to, to protect our spaces and create safe spaces where we can have, frankly, refreshingly far more productive dialogue than what was exhibited on January 6th. And my hope is that we would have, continue to see, what a democracy should be. And that is, peaceful dialogue and open dialogue. And at the same time, always being, having the freedom to be able to challenge, when we see something isn't right. And, I think that's something that certainly reminded me and my family and that my household of immigrants and my friendship circle of immigrants, that this is what we came to America for, right? Is for this freedom to rise up, our freedom to protest, but at the same time also acknowledging that it goes both ways and that it's a very, very complex dialogue. It's a very, very complex, system where, we have to, really sort of examine, the balances here. And so it was a really, really interesting day. It was a really interesting thing for us to recall. And frankly, also explaining that also to my family back home and explaining it, to my relatives all across the world and helping them to understand, what the people in January 6th in the Capitol were rising up against, and what also we had been rising up against, in only a few months prior, during the Black Lives Matter protests. And then all the things that we as Americans have a tendency to want to examine, when we are talking about, how this democracy works or is supposed to work, and how we are intended to really, really examine basically what our identity means in all of these different contexts, which I found to be just absolutely fascinating, and definitely something that my own immigrant experience, having survived, what I have survived, has helped me to navigate.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So Kevin, I'd like to talk to you. We talked a little bit about this already, but you had said that you've been in the long mindset of being a forever grateful refugee. And now you're in this period of potentially challenging that mindset. And how does that affect your work?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long process, right? Because I really was born in a refugee camp. When I was born, I didn't have a country. And my mom had left extreme poverty in Vietnam. She was a boat person. She actually fled Vietnam when she was pregnant with me, and she spent 11 days in a fishing boat. So, growing up and even recently, I always felt like because this country had given me so much, I've always been aware of that, of the opportunity that I've been given because I was raised in the United States. I felt like that I couldn't call anything out, right? Like I couldn't question things about this country because it had given me so much. But what I've realized is, as much as the country has given me, I've given this country a lot, and my mom's given this country a lot. My mom was a social worker for 17 years for the state of Oregon, and she put up with so much vitriol. Like people would curse at her and pretend like they couldn't understand her if their cases didn't go their way. My mom has given this country a lot. I'm done trying to have to prove my Americanness. And I think that really is starting to bleed into my work, because as I mentioned earlier, I really did. It's sad to say, but I really was ashamed of being Asian American. When you grow up as a person of color in a white space, you can't help but feel that. But as I've become an adult, I just watched the Asian American series on PBS, and there was a beautiful line. He's like, you can't, unless you can respect your ancestry and your heritage, you'll never find your identity. And that's really how I feel now in my work. My work before really involved a lot of my queer identity, but now it really involves a lot of my Asian American identity. And it's just been a process of healing for me. I'm 38 and I'm still doing it, but I'm happy to be beginning on the process and continuing on it.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Michael. So I do want to hear about the projects that you're all working on. This is a panel of creatives. So we're going to go back to Kevin, actually. Kevin, tell us more about what you're doing now. Are you focused on getting that feature-length documentary about your mom made?
Yeah, I am making a feature documentary about my mom. The log line is essentially she started writing a book, or she wrote a book about her experiences with the war in Vietnam. And in doing so, she was forced to confront the traumas of her past. But she also began a journey of healing. And she helped her children begin that journey of healing. Right now, it's a 20-minute short. I just fundraised through Kickstarter $40,000. So I'm really excited to begin developing that into a feature. I've also been doing screenings all through AAPI Heritage Month. And the most impactful screening for me was I actually did a screening at a high school, an arts class in El Paso, Texas. And the students, you can never tell with high school students, but they had me sobbing because they were so responsive to the film. And they said that a lot of the students were Mexican American, and they said they could see a lot of their parents in my mother's story. So for me, that's really affirming, and it shows that, there is a place for a film about, a 70-year-old Vietnamese retiree living in Oregon. So I'm so excited to start on this feature, and I'm speaking it into the universe. You're going to see that Sundance or on Netflix in 2022.
Awesome. Well, congratulations again on meeting your Kickstarter goal. And that is still open if people want to give to you, right?
Yeah, it definitely is.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely be looking for it at Sundance. So Michael, tell us about your book.
Absolutely. So as you mentioned earlier, I've spent, more than 2 decades, helping to lead diversity, brand, and content strategy for corporations. And one thing that I've always found throughout my work is the power of stories to create these spaces to explore identities, culture, and community. And so I decided to write all these experiences and whatever wisdoms I may have gleaned from being a queer immigrant, and have distilled it along with other stories from other queer people into this book called The Wisdom of Gunkles. And I wrote this book really because I wanted to tell these, a lot of stories that aren't really told, especially in the context of how LGBTQ people are depicted in the media. And what I've discovered is that there hasn't really been a lot told about what it means in terms of how queer people relate to our families. For those of you who aren't aware, the word gunkle, it literally means gay uncles. And I wanted to explore the relationship between these gunkles, our lanties, our queeros, and especially queer people and our relationship with our families, and specifically our relationship with what I call our nibblings, which is the gender neutral term for nieces and nephews, as well as godchildren and younger cousins, and anyone who we might consider our proteges. And what I discovered in not just writing about my story, but also the stories of this pantheon of amazing queeros from all around the world, that there really is something unique about the lived queer experience that offers a lot of interesting insights about how to live authentically and with compassion. That's something that we certainly share with our nibblings and our beloved proteges, but it's certainly something I think we can share across the world. A big part of my book is venerating, honoring, and reclaiming the term Black sheep. As many people know, the Black sheep is typically seen in the family as a cautionary tale, somebody that you are typically shunned and you don't ever want to be. But what I've discovered is not only are queer people like the quintessential Black sheep, but Black sheep are so incredibly critical to any family in helping them defy and redefine traditions that haven't always been inclusive. And I feel like this is something, and certainly a lesson that I think that we can teach the world, is how we can take ideas and cultural institutions that may seem immovable, but actually can be challenged, can be redefined. Of this is certainly the definition of family. Something that is also very, a cornerstone of the queer experience is the role of the chosen family, and the idea that family is something that a person can decide and can design. And that's certainly something that I think a lot of people can certainly learn about. And also a very, very big part of my book is also the idea of recovering stories. I have very many chapters, one in particular that honors the story of every single LGBTQ family member that was never fully honored, respected, let alone acknowledged. That secret uncle, for example, that was never married, never had kids, and had that roommate. Or that auntie, for example, that you never really heard from except for, when she would, post travel photos with her best friend. And we discovered later on that these people who weren't always part of the family embody these identities that I think a lot of us eventually came to identify with, whether or not we ourselves were queer, because they were different, right? But more importantly, not only were they different, but they also set new standards, new patterns, new paths for what it means to be a person in our family or a person who embodies very similar identities to ours. And so when this book comes out, at the end of August, my hope is to really share these stories with the world and hopefully share the wisdoms that many of these people, many of whom are immigrants from Asia, from Latin America, from Africa, from Europe, and certainly some amazing stories from here in the United States about what it really means to redefine what the word family means, what it redefines to, how we redefine what it means to be a person in a family, and what it really means to live your life with your truth just boldly and authentically.
That's so great. And I think that's going to resonate with people regardless of their sexual orientation, regardless of where they are in the family tree. So can't wait to read that. Frances, tell us what you're working on.
So I have all sorts of projects I'm working on. One is I have a book of poetry tentatively called Breath Rising that is coming out in 2022 at Wayne State University Press. And that's a collection of love stories as well as social justice action. So if you want to hear how I managed to combine the story of my secret crush and the election of President number 45, it's all in one poem. It's it'll be really great fun. And I also have my Beyond Vincent Chin Legacies of Action and Art project, and that is a combination of a book, an anthology of essays by activists around the country, and how this case, what this case means to them, and how it motivated them to have the amazing lives of activism that they did, as well as a digital arts archive at the University of Michigan Library, where we're going to collect all the art that this case has inspired over the last 40 years. And then we'll have a performance of some sort by Island, which is an Asian American performance collaborative that will combine all this. And this is all funded by the Night Arts Challenge Detroit, Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation, and Culture Source. And then also I have, since we're talking about aunties and uncles and elders, I have just started working, experimenting with art installations. And I have this piece called Sewing Aunties. It has there's a poem as well as a art installation, which is at the Asian American Women's Arts Association right now in San Francisco. And that's good, I think.
You sound so busy, and I lost track of how many projects you have, but that's so amazing.
Oh, I have more. I have one more.
Well,
Oh, I have to, one more.
more.
I'm sorry. One more. I have to tell you about this one. So with Island, it's IS/LAND. We just put together this beautiful piece of dance and music and poetry. It's called Lost Constellation. It's at the Detroit Institute of Arts. You can find it on YouTube. Look up Detroit Institute of Arts, Lost Constellation, and it's just gorgeous about the beauty of Asian American women at this time.
Tell us about the name Island. Why is it spelled that way?
Well, when the group started, a lot of us were either Taiwanese or Chinese by way of Taiwan. And so that's how the group started. The first pieces that we made were Taiwanese American, but now that was where it started. And then it has expanded, but it's much more of an Asian American consciousness. Mm-hmm. And then also, actually, this is completely not for sure, but we just started talking with Angel Island Heritage Foundation about doing a piece in conjunction with them, either in the space of Angel Island, or we'll do it digitally away from Angel Island, and we'll recreate Angel Island in wherever we are, and have and tell amazing stories about the women that were there.
That's really excellent. Yeah, it's interesting how much we learn about Ellis Island in school, but hardly anything about Angel Island. So that's great. I hope that collaboration comes to pass. So let's kind of circle back. We talked a little bit about anti-Asian hate already, and that's one of the projects that Kevin's working on as well. So the group Stop AAPI Hate has been tracking anti-Asian incidents. From March of 2020 to March of this year, 6,603 incidents were reported. And this was, so those two, March to March. Physical assault was the third largest category of total reported incidents. And I think all of us have seen videos of various elders being, just randomly attacked for doing nothing other than just basically being on the street. And online harassment was also really highly reported. So let's talk a little bit about what we as Asian Americans might be able to do to prevent ongoing abuse like that. Let's see, let's start with Kevin.
Yeah, I think it's about calling it out. I'll be very honest. When I'm very conflict averse. I'm kind of a timid person sometimes. And there have been plenty of times in my life up until the past few years where a friend has said a racist joke and I didn't call him out on it because I just didn't want to, have that conflict. And we can't do that anymore because these acts of violence is not happening in a void. It's a lifetime of people getting away with saying racist things and saying racist jokes and never getting called out on it. And now they think, okay, well, maybe I can attack, this 70-year-old woman. My mom is a 70-year-old woman, a Vietnamese woman living in Oregon. And I hate the fact that if she goes to the grocery store and she's gone longer than I kind of had anticipated, I start to worry. I worry that there's something happen, you know? And even myself, you know, I'll be, I don't necessarily feel fear when I go outside, but an awareness where I just never go back to an equilibrium. I mean, the world is so crazy right now, but I never can reach that equilibrium where I feel like okay.
Mhm.
And so I think it really is about being more active about calling stuff out and standing up when in the past maybe I haven't.
Well, I appreciate that you do that and want to make sure that you stay safe while doing it. So, you know, it's a lot. I haven't felt particularly safe, especially during the pandemic, and have been checking in with various friends when I go on a walk alone, which is not necessarily something that I would have thought about before. But as a woman and as an Asian American woman in Florida, there's a lot of things that just there's so many unknowns, and I'm not sure what would happen if I don't check in with my friend. I guess they would then maybe report me missing, but it just gives me a sense of some sort of somebody's going to check in on me and know that something might have happened. Michael, how do you think that we as Asian Americans can prevent this rise in abuse? What can we do to stop it besides what Kevin has said, calling out racism?
I think what I've definitely noticed is this increased reliance on coalition building and solidarity with all social justice movements, certainly with other BIPOC communities, you know, with LGBT communities, even struggles for accessibility for the disabled community. I think we've come to realize just how interconnected all of our struggles are and how interconnected our fights are, and that, you know, we really need to be there for each other. You know, as a gunkle, I am the guardian and a proud mentor to two young biracial women who are half Filipino, half African American. And you know, with everything that's happened, you know, in the last couple of months, certainly in the last year, you know, they've come to me and they've come to their, you know, to our family, just expressing their dismay about how they feel like both sides, actually all sides of their identity as women, as Black women, as Asian women, are attacked, and that they feel incredibly vulnerable. And I've certainly had to lean into my own experience as a queer man, as an immigrant person who has had to deal with bias and discrimination and fear, frankly, as I've walked down the street. You know, expressing gender the way I have been known to express it, like I have definitely known what it means to feel insecure and to feel like at any moment, just who I am and my personhood in of itself is going to be attacked. I've had to lead into that experience to help guide them and help them navigate what their own identity and, you know, means, and what it means for them to navigate a world that, frankly, yes, I mean, it's very fair for them, I think, to say and to observe that they do feel that as, you know, half Black, half Asian women, they are very, very vulnerable. And what I've definitely learned for them is, you know, helping them to understand that they're not alone, helping them to understand that there are legions of people out there that are rising up to protect them and to create spaces in a world that is safer for them. And I think part of that is, once again, relying on this community, on coalition building, and understanding that we're all in this together.
Mm-hmm. So that kind of ties back to what Francis had mentioned earlier in light of what happened to Vincent Chin, right? That's when a lot of the Asian American coalitions started forming. How do you see things happening today, Francis?
I think it's really interesting to see all the arts and activism that's coming together. For me, because I've been involved with American Citizens for Justice, which is the organization that was formed when Vincent Chin was killed. My kids have grown up just knowing this stuff all their lives, right? They watched Who Killed Vincent Chin probably really too young, like in 4th grade or something. So they've always known this and they've always been prepared. We've always, you know, done drills and practicing, you know, what do you do if this happens? But in college, one of my daughters is really surprised that her friends are surprised. She's surprised that they're surprised that they had no awareness of this. They didn't know this was happening and they can't believe it. And she's like, yeah, it happens all the time. What are you talking about? And so, we've all been talking about, you know, how this is new for some people, but it isn't new. Historically, it's not new. It's been happening over and over again. And so it's interesting to watch kind of the people who've been in this also talking with people who are just new to this and just learning this. And there's been all sorts of amazing art and coalition building that's coming out. Like, for example, the Anti-Sewing Squad, Christina Wong's group, Anti-Sewing Squad, has been sewing masks originally for first responders, but then now they have built a connection with the Navajo Nation. And so they're sending masks and sewing supplies and sewing machines and liquid soap and stuff. So send Christina Wong money. She's totally worth it. But that's one of the projects that has sprung up out of all of this. And in Oakland, there's a group of mostly Black and Latino volunteers that are walking Asian American elders around as they do their errands so they can go buy groceries safely. In New York, there's groups that are, again, interracial groups that are, and restaurateurs that are cooking meals and filling people's refrigerators. So trying to get at the base causes why people are insecure. So why are people lashing out? Well, a lot of it is economically motivated. So if we as a community can take care of our people and help lift everyone up, hopefully this will have the effect of protecting our elders and women as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. That anti-sewing squad is really an excellent project. So let's kind of cap off today by talking about allyship. We've been talking about that a little bit and coalition building. And what are the ways that allyship can evidence itself in the things that we do as individuals? And what are some of the ways that Asian Americans can forge even stronger allies with other groups? Kevin, I'll let you take this first.
Yeah, I think it's stuff like this is showing up, right? And creating these type of spaces for us to kind of have these conversations and then carrying it beyond just this 45-minute Zoom call. I think the world is starting to open up. People are going out, they're going to be seeing their friends. And again, it's about, like we just can't sit back anymore. We have to have these conversations with ourselves. I think it really does start with ourselves. And then, once you can have those open conversations inside your head and within your friends groups, it kind of extends beyond that. But I really want to commend all of you for being here today and for being a part of this space. And thank you for having this conversation. And I think the more we have these type of conversations, the more we understand about each other. And I think it's about having that empathy. And that's how I hope to build solidarity. I'm a storyteller, so I'm always about, talking and conversations.
Well, we're really grateful for the stories that you're telling. Frances, what do you think about allyship?
Allyship is so important. For me, I've been writing about Asian and Asian American communities for my entire writing career. And I always love to highlight these stories, the really interesting art, really important activism, because that's the power that journalism has. You can tell these stories and help spread the word of what's going on. But I've noticed that I've always kind of kept my most of my life, is all very enmeshed in the Asian American community, but I've kind of kept it segregated from my more mainstream life, the things that are not specifically Asian American. Now, this isn't 50-50 for me. It's probably more like 80-20 or 90-10. But that small percentage, for example, like teaching creative writing at the community college, that used to be just, I would just teach writing. And finally, I realized, you know what? They're never going to learn about Asian American writers unless I teach it. And so I've added in, so I only teach Asian American writers and Asian American stories, and I just weave it in, and I don't ask permission, and I just do it. And people are okay with it because they're like, oh, we've never heard this story before. And I'm starting a column for New York Writers Workshop. It was originally supposed to be about writing, and I'm like, well, writing by itself, anyone can do that. So what can I do that's different? So writing about race and activism. It's going to be called Writing to Save the World. It'll be a great column. It's just about to launch soon. So look for it at New York Writers Workshop. But I'm hoping with this way to reach out to other groups and tell our stories, and then so that they, just to bring more people into the story, into the circle.
Well, I'm excited about how you're going to save the world through writing. That's really great. It's a superpower that's delightful to have. And I also think that that's a great way for people to think about how they can broaden their worldview, especially as the world is slowly opening up, by reading different kinds of authors, by following different kinds of people on social media, people who are unlike you, by maybe try unblocking some of the people who had annoyed you in the past, because those perspectives are still important to know what's happening in other corners of the world. Michael, to you about allyship.
Actually, to carry on your conversation, your point just now about recognizing different perspectives, I think one of the key things that I certainly observed as a key point of allyship is recognizing the biases in our own selves and our communities. I think one thing that we can certainly acknowledge is that, we're not all, immune to bias, prejudice. And I think we, even within our own, API communities, we have certain preconceived notions about other BIPOC communities, about queer people, about, all kinds of other walks of life that we may have grown up, having, possibly some disparaging even ideas about, and different kinds of ideas about, what they represent. And I have found, particularly last summer in the conversations about Black Lives Matter, just how much of that really came to surface when, I was just talking to, some members of my family or just other members of the API community, and realizing that we had a lot of work to do, frankly, in understanding our own complicity, for example, in anti-Blackness, and our own complicity in maybe even anti-immigrant, like set of perceptions. And I think part of that is just being really, really honest with ourselves about, if we are to expect others to be allies to us, that we have to understand and live our own sort of like need for allyship by being good allies and being good stewards, basically, of these struggles, by recognizing our own biases and understanding how to dismantle them. For one thing, just to define them and to see them, but also how to dismantle them, how to reteach ourselves, I think, some of these ideas and notions, and to think differently, frankly. And I think for me, that's certainly the first step in being an effective ally, an impactful ally, is doing that. And then teaching others, and being willing, to teach others, or in some cases, just being willing to be a resource, as people, need me to be. So I think, for me, it's not necessarily about, always about, being out there. Sometimes it's about the work that a person has to do within. And I think for any effective ally, that's the first step.
That's a really great point. Thank you, Michael. You and Kevin both mentioned empathy, and I'm a big fan of Brene Brown. And one of the things that she talks about how empathy is different from sympathy, and how empathy is really feeling with others. And so really that's key. That's a major key to allyship, is being more empathetic, and that's a muscle you can build. So that's really hopeful. All right, well, we are nearly out of time. I just want to get some closing thoughts from everybody. I guess kind of just broadly, what do you want to put out into the world in terms of being an Asian American creative, thinking about your role in inspiring others, and really kind of just wrapping up everything that we've talked about. We've talked about a lot of different things. Whatever you want to add as your closing thought. We'll start with Frances.
I think there's a lot of power in art and activism, and being Asian American, especially at this time, is tricky and difficult. But with art and with activism, we can kind of work through our own stories, figure out our own path, and bring people together. And I really think it's, the arts are one way that we can figure out what's going on in our head and figure out what's going on our hearts and create this new path. And actually, frankly, create the world that we want to live in. I think that I was writing yesterday about the term Asian American, and I think it is aspirational. It's a dream, it's a community. It's a lot about community, and I hope people will walk that path with me and build community.
Oh, count me in. Kevin.
Yeah, count me in. I love what you just said. I don't like this idea of it being aspirational and creating the world we want to live in. I love that. And I guess for me, again, it's like I said, maybe this is a very selfish personal want, but for me, I'm doing a lot of healing, and spaces like this have really helped me. And so I hope we can extend that beyond just this, 4-person Zoom call and take it out. Again, the world is opening up. I'm excited. And, I think we all need to heal from it's been a difficult time generally. So I'm excited, and I'm definitely going to walk that path with you. And yeah, that was great.
And Michael.
I think I definitely want to amplify what Frances said about the role of arts and artists and creatives, specifically in how we are able to deconstruct, the truth, and deconstruct the world and reconstruct, and design a world that is, is better for everyone. I hope that we continue to challenge and question, all the things around us. and realize that there's a lot of work that has to be done, but it's work that we can do together. And then in so doing, that it's something that we can do to uplift, all these voices that aren't always heard, and uplift each other as we, walk this path.
Absolutely. And so, we have all these generations that came before us and all this history that came before us. We know that none of the four of us would be here today if it weren't for immigration laws that got changed. And so there is so much that can happen over a quick period of time just because people are willing to speak up and elevate others. So thank you all for being here today. This was such a wonderful conversation, and I look forward to creating that world that we aspire to live in, reading Francis's Words of Change, learning from Michael's Gunkel book, and watching Kevin's documentary at Sundance. Thanks, everyone.